I've never really talked about this, not properly. A few friends know I had a rough time a few years back, that I kind of dropped off the grid for a while. But they don't know why, not the real reason. Honestly, I'm not even sure I do. But I've carried this thing around in my head long enough. Maybe if I tell it straight, I can stop waking up in the middle of the night wondering if someone's still out there, watching. It started 4 years ago, early spring. The breakup had already happened and my job was circling the drain. My life felt like it had been hollowed out from the inside. I was numb, tired. I wasn't thinking straight, just reacting. So when my uncle passed and I found out I still had access to the cabin he left behind, something in me clicked. I didn't even pack properly. Just grabbed my coat, filled a duffel bag with some clothes and snacks, and left the city behind. The cabin was up north in Maine, near a place called Nashmore Hollow. No cell reception, no neighbors for miles. Just forest and lake and silence. It was a place I hadn't visited since I was 13, but I remembered it vividly. My uncle used to bring me up there in the summers to fish and unplug from the modern world. Back then, it had felt like an adventure. This time, I just needed a place to be alone. The drive took the better part of a day. As I got closer, the roads narrowed, the trees pressed in. Eventually, I turned onto a dirt track, so overgrown I wasn't sure I had the right one. Until I saw the rusted mailbox and the stone marker with the faded red X my uncle carved years ago. The cabin looked smaller than I remembered. Sagging porch, a couple of missing shingles on the roof, and moss creeping up the wooden siding. Still, it felt solid. I found the spare key behind a loose board on the porch and let myself in. Inside, it was exactly as I remembered. Same wood-paneled walls, same sun-faded couch with the cigarette burn on the armrest. A pile of firewood by the stove, still dry. The kitchen was musty, the air stale with disuse, but it was home. Or it felt enough like home for someone running away from everything. I lit a fire, poured myself a drink, and spent the first evening wrapped in a blanket, watching the flames. The silence out there isn't like city silence. It's dense, pressurized, like the trees are holding their breath. That night, I fell asleep on the couch. I woke once around 3 a.m., heart racing, with the weird feeling that someone had called my name. But there was no one there, just the wind and the soft ticking of the old wall clock. The next morning was gray and cold. I went down to the lake, which had mostly thawed by then. Mist clung to the surface, curling in little tendrils. I stood there for a while, listening. You don't realize how loud silence can be until it surrounds you. I thought I saw something across the water, a shadow, maybe a figure. But when I looked again, it was gone. I told myself it was a tree, just a tree. I spent that day chopping wood and trying to distract myself. I wrote in an old notebook I found in the drawer. Nothing important, just stream of consciousness thoughts. Therapy without the therapist. As night fell, I made pasta, lit a few candles, and drank a second glass of whiskey on the porch. That's when I heard it. Footsteps, not close, not obvious, but unmistakable. Somewhere in the trees behind the cabin, slow and deliberate. A crunch, then pause, then another. I froze. The forest had gone still. No insects, no birds. I waited. After a few minutes, the sound stopped. I stayed out there for another hour, just listening, nothing. Eventually, I convinced myself it was an animal. Maybe a deer. I went back inside, locked the door, and tried to sleep. Around 2:30 a.m., I woke again. This time I was sure I'd heard something inside. A scraping sound, like wood dragging against wood. I sat up, heart pounding, and reached for the flashlight I'd left by the bed. The light beam danced across the room, empty. But the sound had stopped. I crept out into the main room. Everything looked untouched. No windows open, no doors ajar. Then I noticed something. The small rug by the back door had shifted, only slightly, but it used to be perfectly aligned with the floorboards. Now it was crooked, and I could see faint scuff marks beneath it, like something had been moved across the floor. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. The next morning I took a long walk to clear my head. I followed one of the old deer paths behind the cabin, heading deeper into the woods. After maybe 30 minutes, I came to a small clearing I didn't remember from childhood. In the center of it was a stone pile, maybe 3 feet high, neatly stacked, and sitting on top, held down by a flat rock, was a Polaroid. It showed the cabin, my cabin, taken from a distance through the trees. The photo was recent. You could see my car in the frame. I turned it over. There was a date written in black ink. The day I arrived. My first instinct was to yell, call out, "Who's out here?" But the silence swallowed me whole. There was no rustling, no fleeing figure, no sound at all. I left the photo where it was, walked back fast, not running. I didn't want to look panicked. That night, I barricaded the door with the couch and pushed a bookshelf in front of the back entrance. I kept the fire poker next to my bed and every light in the cabin on. Still, I heard it. At exactly 3:11 a.m., I remember the time because I was staring at the clock. I heard the front steps creak. Once, twice, then nothing. I held my breath for what felt like an hour. Then came the softest knock I've ever heard. Just one. A gentle tap, like someone testing the wood. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Eventually the sun came up. There was no one outside, no footprints in the frost. But the couch I'd wedged under the door had shifted slightly, like pressure had been applied from the other side. That was when I should have left. But I didn't. I told myself I was being paranoid, that it was all in my head. I spent the next day checking every inch of the cabin. The basement was empty, no crawl space, no sign of animals or squatters. I even hiked back to the stone pile. The photo was gone. That night I set up an old trail camera I found in the shed, tied it to a tree facing the front door, just in case. I slept, if you could call it that, with the lights on. Around 4 a.m., I woke to the sound of clicking, rapid, mechanical, the camera. I got up and opened the front door. There was no one there, but the camera had stopped clicking. I pulled the SD card and plugged it into my laptop, flipped through the images, one by one. Most were dark, blurry, but one was clear. It showed a man standing 10 feet from the door, wearing a hooded jacket, face hidden in shadow. But it wasn't the man that scared me. It was what was behind him. 3 other figures, unmoving, staring straight at the camera, all of them wearing the same jacket, like uniforms. I packed that morning, left the cabin without even cleaning up. I didn't care about the dishes or the sleeping bag or the notebook I'd been writing in. I just left. I didn't tell anyone. I couldn't. What would I even say? I went back to the city, went back to work. I tried to bury it, drink it away. But it stayed with me. Then about a month later, I got a package in the mail. No return address. Inside was a Polaroid of me, sleeping in the cabin, taken from inside the room. The angle was from above, like someone had been crouched in the loft space, watching. My heart nearly stopped. I moved apartments, changed my number, got a dog, started carrying a knife. I even booked a few therapy sessions, but every time I tried to talk about it, my throat would close up. The worst part, it didn't stop. Last summer I was walking home late, maybe 11 p.m., when I noticed a van parked down the block from my building. Plain white, no logos. Something about it felt off. I passed it slowly. Through the windshield, I saw something on the dashboard. Another Polaroid. This one showed me at my desk, taken through my office window. I went to the police again, filed a report. They were polite, but clearly thought I was either paranoid or making it up. No real evidence, no crime committed, just photos. I started checking over my shoulder everywhere I went. And then, just a few weeks ago, I got another letter. Inside was a single scrap of paper, torn from my old notebook, the one I'd left in the cabin. My handwriting, a sentence I had no memory of writing. They only watch when you forget they're there. I don't know what they want. I don't know who they are. But I do know this. They're patient. They know where I live. And they haven't stopped watching. I needed to get away. You know how it is. City noise crawling under your skin, the constant buzz of people, lights that never go out. I hadn't taken a proper break in over a year, so I booked a long weekend, packed up my gear, and headed into the Cascades. Just me, my backpack, and miles of pine and silence. I chose a lesser-known trail, nothing extreme, but remote enough that I wouldn't be bumping into groups of college hikers or kids with Bluetooth speakers. It was supposed to be a 2-day out and back, maybe 3 if I took my time. The first day was perfect. Crisp air, bird song, that satisfying crunch of boots on dried needles. I made it to a clearing by late afternoon, pitched my tent near a stream, and cooked some rice and beans on my camp stove. The silence was so deep it felt sacred. But then, somewhere just after midnight, I heard footsteps outside my tent. Slow, deliberate, crunching leaves. I froze. You know that kind of fear where your body just locks, like your brain is screaming to move, to act, but your limbs have turned to stone. The footsteps circled once, then faded. I didn't sleep. I told myself it was probably a deer or something, maybe even a bear, though it didn't sound heavy enough. Still, I packed up earlier than planned the next morning. Figured I'd just get to the next ridge and backtrack, call it a one-nighter. But that's when I noticed something odd. Just about 100 yards from my sight, there was a sock. Not mine. Dirty white, stiff with mud, just lying there in the middle of the path. A few feet away, an empty can of chili. That part of the trail was supposed to be lightly trafficked. Maybe 1 or 2 hikers a week, max. I kept going, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. Later that afternoon, I took a break by a large fallen log. Checked my phone. No service, obviously. I took a couple sips from my water bottle, looked up, and saw a man standing at the tree line, about 50 feet away, still, watching. He didn't wave, didn't say anything, just stood there with his arms at his sides. I couldn't make out much. He was wearing a dark hoodie, jeans, face sort of shadowed, but he wasn't moving. "Hey," I called out. He turned and just walked back into the trees. No rush, just disappeared. I didn't know what to do. Part of me wanted to just pack up and head straight back to the trailhead, but I was already closer to the midway point than the entrance. I told myself maybe he was a local, maybe someone camping off the trail, maybe he was just weird. But as I hiked on, I kept seeing little things. A strip of duct tape on a branch, a worn boot print going the opposite direction from the trail, a strip of faded orange cloth snagged on a thorn bush. My nerves were fraying. That night, I didn't set up my tent. I didn't want to stay still. I kept walking until twilight bled into full darkness. I found a shallow rock alcove and crouched there, wrapped in my sleeping bag, listening. There were no night sounds, no crickets, no wind, just silence. Then, around 2 a.m, I heard him. Not footsteps this time. Breathing, slow, steady, ragged, somewhere above me, close. I didn't look. I didn't move. I just stayed curled up, trying to make my body disappear into stone. Eventually, the breathing stopped. I must have passed out at some point, because when I opened my eyes again, there was pale light. Dawn. Birds were chirping again. I stood up, every muscle stiff, and started hiking with everything I had left. I didn't even check my GPS. I just wanted out. After what must have been 6 or 7 miles, I saw it, a rusted old ranger station. Looked abandoned, but it was a structure, shelter. I practically ran to it, calling out just in case someone was there. Nobody answered. The inside was dust-covered and dark, but solid. I shut the door behind me and slid a bolt across the frame. There were still some old supplies on the shelves. Cans, a rusted radio, damp firewood. I sat in the corner and tried the radio, even though I knew it was pointless. Dead silence. And then I heard something. Scratching. Not from inside. From under the floorboards. Then knocking. Slow. 3 times. Knock. 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 I stood up, backing away from the sound, and then it stopped. That's when I noticed something carved into the wood near the window. A name, maybe, or just a word. Stay. Over and over again. Dozens of times. Stay, 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 stay. I didn't. I ran. I didn't look back. I don't remember how long it took me to find the main road. Hours, probably. I just kept going until I saw a ranger truck, flagged it down, and practically collapsed at the driver's side. They gave me water, called for help, asked what happened. I told them I got lost. I didn't mention the man, or the breathing, or the word carved into the wall. I didn't want to explain it. I didn't want them to tell me there was nobody else on that trail, that the old ranger station had been boarded up for years, that no one had been assigned to that area in over a decade. They would have told me I imagined it, but I didn't. I still see his face sometimes, in reflections, in dreams, and sometimes when I'm walking to my car late at night. I swear I hear footsteps behind me, slow, deliberate, crunching leaves. It started with the hum. barely audible at first, like the distant buzz of a transformer in the dead of night. It came from somewhere behind the walls of my apartment. A low, droning vibration that didn't stop. At first I thought it was something mechanical, maybe an issue with the old pipes, or a neighbor's appliance gone haywire. It was an old building. Things creaked, groaned, and made noise all the time. I didn't think much of it, but then it didn't stop. Not after a few minutes, not after an hour, not even the next day. It was constant, a ceaseless, almost rhythmic hum, like something alive was nestled in the walls, pulsing, feeding. I asked my neighbors. None of them heard it. The older woman who lived directly next to me looked at me like I was losing it. "Maybe it's tinnitus," she said, giving a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "That's common with stress. You should get some rest." But I wasn't stressed. Not at first, because I knew it wasn't in my head. At night, it got louder. It started interfering with my sleep. I'd lie in bed, eyes wide open in the dark, listening to it. That steady, droning sound that seemed to fill the room. It wasn't just sound. I could feel it, like a weight pressing gently against my skin. I'd get these strange images in my head, like static breaking into my thoughts. Pale walls, dark tunnels, shadows slipping just out of reach. Nothing coherent, just flashes, dreams maybe. Then I started waking up in places I didn't fall asleep. Once, I woke up on my living room floor, surrounded by half-eaten food I don't remember buying. Another time, I found myself standing at the window, forehead pressed against the glass, eyes wide open. It was 3:47 a.m. The hallway light was off. I don't remember getting out of bed. The worst was when I woke up in the bathtub, fully clothed, water running cold. My hands were pruned, like I'd been there for hours. I started locking my bedroom door at night. Didn't matter. The next morning, it would always be unlocked. A week after the hum began, I noticed something new. Scratches on my bedroom wall, faint, like fingernails dragged slowly across the paint. 5 parallel lines, long, deliberate. They hadn't been there before. Each night, they got deeper. I bought a cheap audio recorder, held it up to the wall, tried to capture the hum. Playback was empty, nothing, just dead silence. But I could hear it, louder than ever. I started playing white noise through my speakers at night. Rain sounds, ocean waves. Nothing could drown it out. It was always just beneath the surface, always present, always waiting. And then I started listening to it. I don't know why. Maybe I gave in. Maybe it wanted me to. There was a pattern to it. Not music exactly, but a cadence. Something intentional. Almost like a voice just below the frequency my ears could process. If I concentrated, I could feel it shaping thoughts inside my head. Not words, ideas. At first they were abstract, shapes, rooms, the sense of being watched through a keyhole, the weight of someone else's breath behind me when I was alone. Then came the dreams. In them I was always underground. Cold walls, rough concrete, endless tunnels that twisted and turned and never led anywhere. I never ran. I just walked, barefoot, the stone damp beneath me. And always, always, there was a figure ahead, still, waiting. It never moved, but it was always watching. One night I dreamed I was in a room with no doors, just 4 blank concrete walls and a metal chair in the center. I sat down. I didn't want to, but I had to. The hum was louder there, echoing off the walls, vibrating through the metal of the chair into my spine. It filled my head until I couldn't think. And then the walls started whispering. Not aloud, not like a movie, just a pressure in my skull. Thoughts that weren't mine. Words I couldn't translate but understood anyway. It's almost time. You brought it closer. The wall is thin now. I woke up gasping, sweat-soaked, with a nosebleed. My pillow was stained red. That's when I found the door. Not in the hallway, not in any rational place. It was in my closet. One night, I was organizing my laundry, anything to keep from lying in bed, listening, when I noticed something odd. The back wall of the closet looked different, like the paint had been scraped away. I pushed on it. It moved. It wasn't a wall. It was a door, painted over. Behind it was a narrow passageway, unlit, choked with dust. I should have left it alone. I wanted to leave it alone. But the hum was louder in there, and I wanted answers. So I went inside. It was cramped. I had to crouch. The walls were rough and old, brickwork crumbling in places. I used my phone's flashlight, the beam catching clouds of dust, broken boards, dead insects. The tunnel led deeper than the building should have allowed. I passed exposed wires, rusted pipes, what looked like old insulation, and then it opened into a room that should not have existed. It was circular, concrete, no windows, no furniture, except one thing, a metal chair, bolted to the center of the floor. I didn't want to look. I knew what I'd find, but I did anyway. Sitting in that chair was me, my face, my clothes, my body. But my eyes were missing, the sockets were empty, and the hum was coming from inside my other self's chest. I ran, stumbled through the tunnel, back through the closet, slammed the hidden door shut. I didn't sleep that night. I haven't slept since. Because the next night, the door was open again, and the chair was empty. The hum is still with me, louder than ever, but now it changes when I move. It responds. It follows me. The man, the thing that wore my face, has started appearing in the corner of my vision, reflected in glass, standing behind me in my dreams. He doesn't speak. He just watches. He's waiting for something. I've noticed changes, subtle things. When I speak, my voice echoes wrong. My reflection sometimes moves just a second too late. Strangers flinch when they pass me. Children stare, wide-eyed, then cry. I found more scratches on my wall this morning, but they're not near the closet. They're above my bed. 5 parallel lines, like fingers pressed into the drywall. I don't know how much longer I can stay here. I don't know how much longer I'll be me. I've started recording this story in case I disappear, in case I become him. Because I think the hum is not just sound. It's a signal, a key. And once you hear it, really hear it, you don't come back. You open something, and what steps through isn't you anymore. I've never really believed in the idea of bad places, like actual locations that somehow hold on to something wrong. But after what happened last fall, I'm not so sure anymore. I'd been going through a rough patch. My girlfriend had just moved out. Work was burning me out, and I hadn't had a decent night's sleep in weeks. So when my friend Derek offered me the keys to his family's cabin for a solo weekend getaway, I didn't even hesitate. It's in upstate Vermont. He told me it was basic, no cell reception, wood stove, no internet, but quiet, peaceful. That was all I needed. He texted me the code to the lockbox and said, "You'll love it. Bring books, hike, drink whiskey, sleep in." It was a long drive. The road turned gravelly about an hour past Montpellier. I remember the trees getting denser, that thick, almost oppressive kind of forest. I arrived late afternoon on a Friday, sun hanging low, long shadows crawling across the ground. The cabin itself was pretty much what I expected. Single-story, wood-paneled, little front porch with a swing. You could tell it hadn't been used in a while. Some cobwebs on the corners, old pine needles stuck in the deck boards. The woods were so quiet, it almost rang in my ears. Inside, it was cozy, rustic, a little dusty. It smelled like old books, firewood, and something slightly sour underneath. Maybe mildew, but not terrible. The bedroom was small, just a bed and a dresser. The windows looked out onto the trees, so thick you could barely see more than 20 feet out. I built a fire, poured a drink, and sat out on the porch until the sun disappeared. There's something about that part of the woods. Once the sun sets, it's like the darkness isn't just absence of light. It's heavy, almost textured. That first night, I slept okay. A few creaks and groans from the walls. But that's expected in a place like that. The weird thing, though, was waking up around 3 a.m. to what I thought was footsteps on the porch. I sat up, heart pounding, and listened. Nothing. Just the faint crackle of the dying fire, and maybe the wind in the trees. I told myself it could have been an animal, a raccoon or a deer, maybe even just the house settling. But when I got up the next morning and stepped outside, I saw them. Footprints, human footprints, barefoot. They were faint but unmistakable, dirty impressions, heel to toe, leading from the tree line to the edge of the porch, then back again. I stood there for probably a full minute, not moving, just staring at them. The size was hard to judge. They looked off, not child-sized, but not full adult either. Long toes, wide forefoot. I tried to shake it off, told myself it must have been old prints. Maybe Derek's family had guests up and forgot to mention it. But that whole day, I felt watched. Like the trees weren't just trees anymore. Every little rustle made me glance up. At one point, I walked the perimeter of the clearing around the cabin, half-heartedly pretending I was just out for a walk, but really just trying to prove to myself that no one was out there. The rest of Saturday was quiet. I read, made some food, drank. I almost managed to convince myself it was all in my head. Until that second night. I'd locked up tight, windows shut, door bolted. I even stacked a couple of fire logs against the inside of the door. It made me feel stupid, but it also made me feel better. It was around 1 a.m. when I woke up. Not to a noise, but to silence. Like complete silence. No wind, no insects, not even the trees creaking. That kind of quiet that presses on your eardrums. Then I heard the floorboards groan inside the cabin. Not loud, just one soft, unmistakable creak, like someone had stepped on the edge of a plank in the living room. I lay there, absolutely still. My mouth went dry. I could hear my heart beat in my ears. Another creak, closer. I sat up slowly and reached for the flashlight I'd left on the nightstand. Clicked it on. Nothing. The door was shut. Shadows cast from the fireplace danced across the walls, but there was no one in the room. I stood up, trying to keep my breathing quiet, and crept to the door. The living room was empty. The front door was still bolted. The logs I'd stacked hadn't moved. I turned in a slow circle, sweeping the flashlight. Everything looked untouched. But then I noticed the back door. It was cracked open, just slightly. I hadn't even remembered there was a back door. It led out to the woods behind the cabin. I shut it gently, latched it, and shoved the old coat rack against it. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. Just sat in bed with the flashlight in one hand and a fireplace poker in the other. In the morning, I told myself I was leaving. I started packing. But something weird happened when I got to my car. It wouldn't start. I checked everything: battery, fuel. I even tried the jumper cables with the emergency battery pack I brought. Nothing. That's when I realized my phone still had no signal, and the cabin didn't have a landline. I sat there for a while, just trying to figure out what to do. Hike out. The main road was maybe 6 miles back. Doable, but I hadn't seen another house for a good 10 miles before that. I decided to wait until noon, then hike. I figured someone might come by, or I'd find a better signal point on a ridge. But by noon, I hadn't seen anyone, and something had changed in the woods. The birds were gone. I know that sounds small, but it wasn't. There's always birds in the forest. Even if you're not paying attention, they're there, chirping, rustling. But that morning, nothing. Just wind. I started hiking. Took my backpack, a bottle of water, and the flashlight. About half a mile in, I noticed something odd in the trees. Bits of fabric. They were tied to branches, about shoulder height. Torn pieces of shirts, I think. Faded. Then bones. Not human, I don't think. But scattered along the trail. Clean, sun-bleached. Maybe animal remains, but placed too deliberately. Little clusters, arranged in circles. The trail began to feel like it wasn't mine anymore. I turned back. I couldn't explain why. Just a cold feeling that crawled into my gut. When I got back to the cabin, the front door was open. Wide open. I know I locked it. I know I did. Inside, everything was just slightly wrong. My backpack was unzipped. My clothes were pulled out, folded, and placed on the bed. The firewood had been restacked into a neat little pyramid, and on the kitchen table was a dead bird. No blood, just lying there, eyes open, perfectly still. I lost it. I screamed, grabbed the bird and threw it into the woods. I started yelling, hoping whoever was doing this would hear me, hoping I could scare them off. Nothing. No response. No sound. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the corner of the living room with the fire poker again, all the lights on, just waiting. And at some point, I don't even know what time, I saw movement in the trees through the front window. Just a flicker, like someone darting between the trunks. Then another, and another. I counted 5 shapes, all pale, all low to the ground. They didn't come close. They just moved, around, circling. I shut off the lights, sat there in the dark, and they stayed until just before dawn, and then they vanished. When daylight came, I hiked out. Didn't pack, didn't lock up, just left everything. I walked for hours until I hit a road and flagged down a truck. The guy didn't say much, just stared at me, then asked if I'd come from the logging cabins. I said no. I said I was at a private place. He just nodded, real slow. Then he said, "You shouldn't go up there alone." That was it. Later back home, I told Derek what happened. He went pale, said no one had used that cabin in years, not since his uncle went missing up there in 2004. They assumed he got lost hunting, but his body was never found. A few weeks after I got back, I got a manila envelope in the mail. No return address. Inside was a photograph. It was grainy, black and white. Looked like a trail cam image. It showed the cabin, my cabin, taken from the tree line. In the photo, I was sitting on the porch, book in hand. But behind me, through the screen door, was a face, pressed to the glass, mouth open, eyes wide, watching me. It started last autumn, when I took some time off work and drove out to the village my grandmother grew up in. Stettin, a little place tucked away in the hills, somewhere in Lower Austria. I'd never been there before, but my mother mentioned it sometimes in passing, how quiet it was, how isolated. She hadn't been back since her childhood, and I think that suited her just fine. I went mostly out of curiosity. I'd inherited my grandmother's old cottage after she passed, and something about it, maybe the way it kept coming up in conversation, or how the lawyer emphasized it had been untouched for years, made me feel like I needed to see it for myself. Just for a weekend, I thought. The drive took longer than expected. Roads narrowed as I got further into the countryside, and the trees closed in like they were trying to reclaim the land. I passed maybe 2 or 3 cars in the last hour before reaching the village. Stettin looked like it had been dipped in amber, frozen in time. Stone cottages with weather-beaten shutters, a single shop that also served as the post office, a church with a crooked steeple. There were people, sure, but only a few, mostly older folks who watched me a little too long as I parked near the cottage. I didn't think much of it at the time. Small towns are like that, right? Everyone notices when someone new shows up. Still, there was something in the way they looked at me. Not just curiosity, more like recognition or expectation. Like they were waiting for something to happen. The cottage was exactly what you'd imagine. Quaint, overgrown, musty. The kind of place where everything creaks. I spent the afternoon opening windows, brushing off cobwebs, trying to air the place out. There were old photos on the mantel, grainy black and white shots of people I didn't recognize, except maybe my grandmother as a child. In all of them, everyone looked solemn, like they were trying hard not to look scared. I remember that first night vividly. I went to bed early, no TV, no Wi-Fi, and barely a phone signal, just books and the wind and the occasional creak from the roof beams shifting. I must have drifted off around 9. I woke up at 2:17 a.m. I know that because I checked the old flip clock on the nightstand. Something had woken me, but I couldn't say what. No loud noise, just a pressure, like the air had changed, heavy, still. I lay there, listening. Nothing. But then, something faint. Not inside, but outside. A shuffling sound, maybe 20 feet from the bedroom window. Slow, deliberate. Not an animal, too steady. I pulled back the curtain, but the moonlight didn't reach far enough to show anything useful. Just the garden, the fence, the edge of the woods beyond. I told myself it was just a deer, that's all. Still, I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning I walked into the village. The shopkeeper was a woman in her 60s, polite but guarded. When I mentioned my grandmother, her eyes narrowed slightly. "Ah, the Weiler house," she said. Not a question. I nodded. "Yeah, I'm just cleaning it up a bit. Thought I'd stay for the weekend." She paused, then added quietly, "It's been empty a long time." I said nothing. She handed me a loaf of bread, some cheese, and a bottle of mineral water. As I was paying, she looked me dead in the eye and said, "Don't go out after dark." I laughed, awkwardly. "Superstition?" She didn't laugh, just gave me a small, tight smile. "Just keep your doors locked." That afternoon I went for a walk. Wanted to get a sense of the place, you know. There was a trail leading through the woods just beyond the cottage. It felt familiar somehow, like I'd seen it in a dream. Tall trees, scattered with moss-covered stones. The kind of path that makes you feel like you're being watched, even when you're alone. About a mile in, I found something. It was a small clearing, almost perfectly circular. At the center, a stone well. No roof, no bucket, just a dark opening in the ground. It looked ancient, worn smooth around the edges. There were no markings, just silence. I looked down into it, but couldn't see the bottom. I dropped a pebble. No sound. I don't know how long I stood there. It was like something pulled at my attention, at my thoughts. I started thinking about my grandmother, about how she left and never came back, about how my mother never talked about her childhood. The air around that well was thick. Still, I shook it off eventually, walked back quicker than I'd come. That night, I locked every door and window, left the lights on, but at 2:17 a.m. again, I woke up. This time, there was no doubt. I heard footsteps right outside the cottage, slow, deliberate, circling the house. I held my breath and listened. Then, 3 knocks. Not at the front door, at the bedroom window, not loud, just a soft, rhythmic tap. I didn't move. I just lay there, staring at the ceiling, counting each breath, feeling my heart pound against my ribs. Eventually, it stopped. The next morning, I found footprints in the dirt below the window. Bare footprints, human, no shoes. The toes were long, splayed, almost like fingers. I told myself it was a prank, maybe someone messing with me, someone from the village, but I didn't really believe that. I went back to the shop, asked the woman behind the counter if there were hikers, kids, anyone who might have been out that late. She shook her head. "They come back this time of year," she said. I asked who she meant. She didn't answer. That night I stayed up, sat in the living room with the lights off, watching through the window. I had a kitchen knife on the table beside me, though I don't know what I thought I'd do with it. Midnight passed, then 1 a.m., nothing. But at exactly 2:17, the air shifted. I swear it was like a vacuum. The quiet was so total I could hear my own blood rushing. And then I saw movement. A figure just at the edge of the yard, barefoot, pale, long-limbed, not quite right, like someone trying to walk like a person but not knowing how. It didn't come closer, just stood there, watching. I didn't sleep. The next day I went back to that well. I don't know why. Maybe I thought I'd find answers. The path looked different in daylight, less ominous, but the clearing was the same. Still, empty. Except there was something new. A photograph, sitting on the stone edge of the well. It was old, curled at the edges, black and white. My grandmother, maybe 9 or 10, standing at the very spot where I stood now. Behind her, barely visible in the trees, figures, tall, shadowed. And at the bottom of the photo, in shaky handwriting, Sie kehren immer zurück. They always return. I took the photo and left. That night, I drove back to the city. Didn't even pack properly. Just got in the car and went. But even here, I keep waking up at 2:17 a.m. Sometimes I think I hear the same soft knock. 3 taps. I don't know what's real anymore. I looked through my grandmother's things after that. Found letters. She wrote to someone, maybe a cousin, about dreams she had, about footsteps outside her room, about the well. The last letter ended abruptly. Just a single line. You don't see them in mirrors? That part stayed with me. Now I cover every mirror in my apartment before I go to sleep. I don't know if it helps. 2 weeks ago I got a package. No return address. Inside, a copy of a police report from 1956. 3 children disappeared from Stettin. All last seen playing near the woods. The only thing found was a shoe, half buried near an old well. The report noted no sign of struggle, no known suspects. The investigating officer wrote something in the margin. Locals say the village used to leave out offerings, bread, milk. No one does anymore. I don't know why I'm telling you this, maybe just to get it out. To warn someone. Or maybe because tonight, it's almost 2:17, and I think I hear footsteps again. I've always loved hiking alone. There's something about being deep in the woods, far from traffic, cities, and people, that clears my mind. You can hear your own thoughts better when the only sounds are the wind pushing through the trees and the crunch of your boots on the trail. This story happened 3 years ago, and I haven't told many people about it. I'm not sure they'd believe me anyway. But after sitting on it for so long, I just want to get it off my chest. I had a long weekend off work and decided to do an overnight hike in a national forest, about 4 hours from where I live. I'd been there before. Lots of dense pine forest, ridgelines, streams. Exactly the kind of place where cell service drops after 10 minutes. I parked at the trailhead, signed in at the little ranger logbook, and headed out. It was early fall. The leaves were just starting to change, and the air had that clean, dry bite to it. I brought my usual gear: tent, food, water filter, flashlight, extra batteries, all that. I planned to make it to a little backcountry campsite by dusk. It was a spot I'd read about on a hiking forum. Nothing official, just a flat clearing a little ways off the trail. About halfway through the hike, I passed an older man sitting on a boulder near a fork in the path. He looked like a hiker, but something about him felt off. His gear was old, like really old, and there was no pack, no water bottle, just this worn wool jacket and boots that looked like they belonged in a museum. I gave him a nod. He didn't smile. He just said, "It gets real quiet up there." I chuckled, thinking he was just making conversation. "That's why I like it," I said. He looked me dead in the eye and said, "No, I mean it. Real quiet. If you hear anything, don't answer." Then he turned his head and looked back down the trail like he was expecting someone else to come. I should have taken that as a sign to turn around. But I didn't. I just thought, weird old guy, and kept going. I made it to the clearing just before sunset. It was even nicer than I expected. Flat, tucked between a few big rocks, with a decent view of the valley below. I set up my tent, made dinner, and sat out by a small fire until the sky turned that deep, starry black. That night, I lay in my sleeping bag with the tent flap half open, watching the trees shift in the wind and listening to the crackle of the last embers. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how alone I felt, in a good way. Somewhere in the distance, a branch snapped. I froze, holding my breath. It wasn't close. Probably a deer, I told myself. Maybe an owl. The woods are full of sounds if you're quiet enough to hear them. But then, it came again. A snap. Then another. Closer this time. Crunching leaves. Slow footsteps. I turned off my headlamp and sat up, straining to hear. Whatever it was moving toward the clearing. No flashlight, no talking, just steps, heavy ones, too heavy for a deer. I stayed dead silent. The footsteps stopped, right at the edge of the clearing, and then nothing. No movement, no sound, not even the wind. It was the quietest I've ever heard the forest. I didn't even hear bugs, just that horrible pressing silence, like the whole place was holding its breath with me. I didn't dare unzip the tent. I just sat there, heart pounding in my throat, gripping the little hatchet I always bring for firewood. After maybe 2 minutes, though it felt like hours, the sound started again. But it wasn't footsteps this time. It was breathing, slow, shaky, like someone trying not to hyperventilate, right outside my tent. I held my breath. My eyes were locked on the thin fabric of the tent wall. I could feel someone standing there just a foot away. And then, the most chilling thing I've ever heard in my life. It whispered, "Help me." Not loud, not aggressive, just desperate. I didn't say anything. The man on the trail came back to me. "If you hear anything, don't answer." So I didn't. It whispered again, this time more urgent. "Please, help me." Still I stayed quiet. The breathing got louder, angrier, like whatever it was knew I was in there and wasn't playing along. Then, I swear to God, it laughed. Not a normal laugh. It sounded like someone trying to remember how to laugh. Short, broken bursts of air, like it didn't really understand what the sound was supposed to be. Then silence again. I waited, frozen in place, for what felt like an eternity. I must have fallen asleep at some point. When I woke up, it was morning. The clearing was empty. No footprints, no sign of anything at all. I packed up and hiked out as fast as I could. At the trailhead, the logbook still had my name signed in, but no one else had signed in before or after me. I drove home in a daze and didn't hike alone for a long time after that. Sometimes, late at night, I think about going back, just to prove to myself that it was real. But then I hear that voice in my head again, that awful whisper, "Please, help me." And I remember that I never, ever want to hear it again.